When you decide to disappear without drama, the first thing to understand is that silence is not a tactic. It's a byproduct of emotional clarity. You are not going quiet to provoke a reaction or to test his feelings. You are going quiet because you no longer feel the need to explain, defend, or perform your emotions for someone who hasn't earned that access. There is a calm power in stepping back without announcing it. No warning, no long messages, no emotional speeches. Just a subtle shift where your energy is no longer readily available. That absence feels different because it isn't loud. It doesn't feel like punishment. It feels final in a way that unsettles him because there is nothing for him to push against, argue with, or manipulate. Most people think that to be missed, you have to be dramatic, emotional, or visibly hurt. But drama gives him reassurance that he still matters. Your tears, your anger, your explanations all confirm his importance in your emotional world. When you remove those reactions, you remove the validation. You stop giving him proof that he still occupies space in your thoughts. This is where the psychological shift happens. He starts replaying moments, not because you demanded attention, but because you stopped asking for it. Your silence isn't cold, it's neutral. And neutrality is far more uncomfortable than anger because it offers no emotional feedback. He's left alone with his own assumptions, and that's where regret quietly begins to grow. Disappearing without drama also means resisting the urge to clarify your intentions. You don't announce that you're focusing on yourself. You don't explain that you're taking space. You simply redirect your energy back into your own life. Your routines change, your availability shrinks, your responses become slower, shorter, and eventually unnecessary. This isn't about pretending to be busy. It's about genuinely becoming less emotionally invested. When your focus shifts inward, your actions naturally follow. He feels the distance not because you created it intentionally, but because you stopped closing it for him. That kind of distance feels real, and reality is what forces reflection. The most powerful part of this approach is that it protects your dignity. There is no regret in how you show up, no messages you wish you hadn't sent, no moments where you feel exposed or overextended. You didn't beg, you didn't threaten, and you didn't disappear in a storm of emotion. You simply stepped out of a role that no longer served you. And when he looks back, what haunts him isn't what you said or did. It's what you didn't do, you didn't chase. You didn't collapse, you didn't stay accessible, you became someone who quietly chose herself, and that absence lingers far longer than any dramatic goodbye ever could. Replacing him with a life, not another person, is where real power begins because it removes competition from the equation entirely. When you replace him with someone else, you're still orbiting the same emotional center, just with a different face. Your happiness is still reactive, but when you replace him with a fuller life, your focus shifts from proving something to building something. Your time fills with purpose, movement, and growth that has nothing to do with him. This is what creates the unsettling realization that he hasn't been replaced, he's been outgrown. And that realization cuts deeper because it can't be challenged or competed with. Men feel it when they are no longer the main event in your emotional calendar. When you stop waiting for messages, stop arranging your schedule around his availability, and stop measuring your mood by his attention, the dynamic changes instantly. You're no longer the person who was always there. You're the person who is now selectively present. This isn't an act, It's a consequence of having a life that demands your energy elsewhere. He senses the shift in priority, even if he can't articulate it. What once felt secure now feels uncertain, because your world is no longer revolving around him. A full life creates a kind of absence that can't be filled with quick attention or shallow gestures. When your days are occupied with meaningful goals, social connections, and personal growth, there's no space left for emotional bargaining. You don't need closure conversations or reassurance check-ins. You don't need to announce that you're doing better. It shows in how little you need from him. The less you need, the more he feels the loss of relevance. He realizes that access to you is no longer automatic. It's not withheld out of spite. It's unavailable because your life is already rich. This is where regret begins to form, not from jealousy, but from contrast. He starts comparing the version of you that waited to the version of you that moves forward. The difference is striking. You laugh more freely, you speak with less hesitation, and you no longer seek permission to enjoy your life. He sees that your happiness doesn't depend on his presence, and that realization forces him to confront his own absence in your world. The irony is that the moment he feels compelled to return is the same moment you no longer need him to. Stopping the habit of explaining yourself is one of the most uncomfortable yet liberating shifts you can make. When you explain, you are seeking understanding, approval, or validation, often from someone who has already shown you they aren't listening. Every justification keeps the emotional door slightly open. It invites debate, misinterpretation, and negotiation of your boundaries. When you choose not to explain, you are not being cold or dismissive, you are being clear. Clarity doesn't require words when your actions are consistent. The absence of explanation signals that your decisions are no longer up for discussion, and that alone changes the power dynamic. Most people over-explain because they fear being misunderstood, but being misunderstood by the wrong person is less damaging than being emotionally drained by constant clarification. When you stop narrating your feelings, you stop handing him a script to react to. There is no longer a clear emotional map for him to follow. This creates a gap where certainty used to live. That gap is uncomfortable because it forces him to think rather than respond. Without your explanations, he has to interpret your distance on his own, and interpretation often leads to self-doubt, reflection, and regret. Letting the gap do the talking means you allow silence to exist without rushing to fill it. You don't jump in to smooth things over. You don't clarify your intentions when he seems confused. You don't rescue him from the discomfort of not knowing where he stands. This is not cruelty, it's restraint. Restraint is what communicates self-respect. When you resist the urge to explain, you show that you trust your own judgment enough to let your actions stand on their own. That quiet confidence is deeply unsettling to someone who was used to having emotional access on demand. Over time, this lack of explanation becomes a mirror. He begins replaying conversations, searching for clues he once ignored. He notices the moments where you stopped asking, stopped chasing, stopped justifying. What once felt like emotional availability now feels like distance he can't cross. And because you didn't announce this shift, he can't argue with it. There was no dramatic boundary drawn, just a natural withdrawal. The space you leave behind becomes louder than any explanation ever could, because it forces him to sit with what he lost without being told how to feel about it. Becoming someone he no longer recognizes doesn't mean changing your personality to prove a point. It means shedding the version of yourself that was shaped by uncertainty and waiting. Growth happens quietly, often without an audience, and that's why it feels so unsettling when he finally notices it. You move differently, speak differently, and react with a calm that didn't exist before. The old emotional triggers no longer control you. What once pulled a reaction from you now barely registers. This shift isn't intentional performance. It's the natural result of self-respect taking root where insecurity used to live. When someone returns expecting the old dynamic and meets a new version of you, it creates instant disorientation. He may try familiar behaviors, familiar words, familiar charm, only to find they no longer land the same way. You're not cold, you're just not reactive. You're present without being available. That difference is impossible to ignore because it removes the emotional leverage he once had. He starts to realize that the version of you he knew was tied to a time when you were more flexible with your boundaries. Now those boundaries exist without explanation, and that makes you feel unfamiliar. The most unsettling part for him is recognizing that this version of you cannot be replaced. He might look for someone else who offers the same warmth, patience, and understanding you once gave, but without the same depth. What he fails to see is that your value was never just in what you gave, but in how you grew. The emotional maturity you now carry changes the standard. You're no longer reacting from fear of loss, but choosing from a place of self-worth. That shift makes it impossible for him to recreate what he had, because it was built on a version of you that no longer exists. Regret doesn't come from being shut out. It comes from witnessing irreversible change. He sees that you're not waiting, not wondering, and not leaving doors open just in case. Your life continues without reference to him. There's no bitterness, no revenge, just forward motion. That's what makes the loss feel real. He doesn't feel rejected. He feels replaced by time, growth, and evolution. And the hardest realization is that even if he came back, he would be meeting someone who no longer needs the closure he once withheld.